Welcome, everybody. I'm joined today with my colleague, Charlotte. My name is Tammy. We work within the recruitment and admissions team. We're really thrilled that you could join us today. The purpose of today's session is really to run through how to prepare a strong application, the things that you should expect, and how we can help you with making sure that you prepare as strong of an application. Hi, everybody. Welcome to today's webinar. My name is Tammy. I'm joined today with my colleague, Charlotte. Charlotte,
hi, I'm Charlotte Kelshiker.
I hope that everybody can hear us. Please do send us through a quick note if you can hear us, just so that we can make sure that today's session goes smoothly. So the purpose of today's session is really to run through how to prepare a strong application. What are the things that we are looking for at Oxford, and how can we help you make sure that your best qualities come through? So we'll be running through a number of different slides. At any point in time, please feel free to send through any questions that you may have, specifically around the application process. In today's session, we're not going to be covering things around scholarships and funding, but we are happy to take any other questions outside of that. And then at the end of the session, we'll take the questions after the slides have run through. So at Oxford, we're looking for candidates that really can contribute to the classroom, that can really make sure that their experiences that they can bring through to their peers is something that we value extremely. So at the business school, we are very committed to having an impact both in business and society, and we look for candidates that are able to contribute to those goals and the vision of the school. When you look at our class profile, you can see that we have a very diverse community. We have no atypical type of student. The class is made up of approximately 310 to 330 students every year. This current class is made up of 315 students with 62 nationalities. 93% of the class is international. So you can see that everybody in essence is a minority. We have 39% female participants with a 690 median GMAT score. And when you look at the actual breakdown of nationalities, you can see that we have candidates from across the globe. We do have a number of candidates coming from places, within North America, Canada, and the US. We have over 12 African nationalities represented within our Africa cohort. We have a strong representation from Asia, including South and Southeast and East Asia, as well as Europe. So you'll be surrounded by candidates perhaps that you would never have met before in terms of their background, whether it's their nationality, work experience, what they really bring to the classroom will be unique. And I think that is the power of Oxford and its convening power, to both bring candidates that come from very different backgrounds, as well as individuals that will contribute to your classroom through events, forums, Oxford Union debates, etc. So we're going to jump straight into the application requirements. I'm going to hand over to my colleague Charlotte, who can run through more on the admissions process.
Yeah, hi, good afternoon, everybody. I'm sure most of you are looking to hit the deadline that's coming up next Friday, 11th of January. So you're probably already pretty familiar with what we look for in terms of application requirements. Nonetheless, we're also conscious that some of you might be thinking about stage 4 or potentially even applying next year. So it is worth recapping what we look for in our candidates. And these are the kind of materials that you would need to gather together to make sure that you're in pole position to pull your application together when you're ready. So unsurprisingly, as Tammy's already touched upon, work experience is important when you are applying to an MBA, unlike a normal taught master's degree. So you are going to need to put together a CV or resume for us. And we like you to try and distill this to just 1 page long, just to cover your academics, your work experience, little bit of information about your extracurricular activities, maybe what you like to get up to outside of work. Because remember, it's not only in the workplace that you can, for example, demonstrate leadership and other qualities. You also, because you are applying to business school, you are going to need to sit either the GMAT or GRE before you apply. Now, this is something that is not going to be an enjoyable experience for you, I'm sure, but for us, for the admissions committee, it does give us quite a good insight into your rounded capabilities. So not only your quantitative abilities, but also your abilities around verbal reasoning, integrated reasoning, and your ability to write and dissect a scenario and put together an argument as to how you might, for example, solve a problem. We really don't mind whether you sit for the GMAT or GRE if you're currently trying to decide between the two tests. They measure broadly similar skills, so we don't have a strong preference either way. It is worth mentioning, though, you do need to be in possession of your unofficial score sheet when you apply to the MBA. And for the GMAT, you get that on the day, but for the GRE, you don't get it until about 2 weeks after the test. So that's worth bearing in mind when it comes to scheduling your test. You also need to have ready your undergraduate degree transcripts and potentially your graduate degree transcripts as well if you've already sat for another master's degree or perhaps even a PhD. So you need to gather together your degree transcripts. We really don't mind what subjects you have studied. It's worth reiterating the fact that this is a really broad-based generalist MBA program at Oxford. So we are not going to insist that you've been exposed to, for example, really quant subjects at undergraduate level. So we genuinely welcome applications from right across the academic sphere. But in terms of the level of degree classification that we're looking for, probably broadly comparable to upper second class honours in the UK system. So for those of you who are familiar with a 4-point scale, might be listening from the US, for example, that would be around 3.5 or north of that. Now, for those of you who are not citizens of a majority English-speaking country, as defined by the UK Border Agency, you will need to sit an English test before you can apply. So you're going to need to sit either a TOEFL or an IELTS or a Cambridge Proficiency in English test. And you do need to have sat this within the last 2 years before you apply. Now, I won't go into the minimum scores that you need because that's fully detailed on our website. I'm sure you're familiar with that already from the research that you've done to date. But it is worth saying that you need to meet the minimum overall score and the individual component scores. Now, some of you might have been educated in English, even though you're a citizen of a non-English speaking majority country. So if you are, for example, listening to us from Japan, but you did your degree in the USA, for example, we will not expect you to take an English test. We will waive that requirement because you have completed an entire degree that's been taught exclusively in English. It's also worth mentioning that some of you might have been educated in English in a country that's not majority speaking English. So I'm thinking here a classic case would be Singapore or India, where you could also qualify for a waiver from the English test if you provide us evidence of the fact that your degree was taught entirely in English. So there are some surprises in terms of countries where you would think it might be majority English speaking and it's not on our list. I'm thinking here of perhaps countries like South Africa. So you'll find that a lot of degrees in South Africa taught in English. Fabulous. You'll qualify for a waiver. So just check that out, that it does mention it either on your transcript or get your university to do you a letter to that effect. It's a very, very common requirement, so you can get hold of letters like that really easily, but just make sure you gather it together before you apply. Few more things that you're going to need to turn your attention to in terms of application requirements. You need to write a couple of essays for us. One is a very broad-based question, and the current essay title asks you to think about a trend or statistic that you find shocking and why it shocks you and how you think that could be changed for the better. Now, really here anything goes. It doesn't have to be particularly oriented towards your professional experience. It could be anything that you feel strongly about. It's really just an exercise where you can demonstrate your knowledge and passion, and also your solution orientation. The second essay really just says, is there anything else you want to tell us about you? So that's a golden opportunity to sell yourself to us further. You might want to tell us more about your extracurricular activity. You might want to tell us about something you do in your spare time. It could be voluntary experience. You might also want to address perhaps underperformance in your degree, or maybe explain that your GMAT score is weaker than you wanted, and perhaps explain to us why that might be. That could provide the committee with some useful extra context. You need to register 2 people to act as referees for you. So give thought to that before you apply. Talk to them, make sure they are ready, willing and able to act as your referees. You will register them on the application system. They then receive an email from us giving them instructions as to what to do, and then they submit their letter of recommendation online. It's very straightforward, very secure, but think about the kind of people that know you really well. We're not particularly bothered by someone's professional status, but we are bothered by the quality of the reference that person can submit. So think about people that you work with closely. This could be perhaps a direct line manager of yours, or it could be a client. It could be someone that you've worked with regularly on an external basis, that perhaps you've been consulting with a third-party client and you've delivered a number of successful projects for them, and they might actually be able to speak to your ability and your work and your qualities and your character better than anyone inside your organization. So you can think quite creatively about who will act as a referee for you. And we don't mind whether your referees are professional or academic, though I'd suggest for most of you, you're likely to have been outside of academia for some time. So professional references are more likely to be from people that know you better than perhaps your professors from years ago at university, unless you kept in close contact. Another important criteria for us when it comes to a strong candidate is someone that is really going to bring some life and work experience to the party. We want you to come have a great time here at Oxford, and you can really only do that by being ready to share and collaborate with your classmates. It's not just about coming here to acquire knowledge, it's also about sharing of yourself and your wisdom and experience that you've built up to date. And that's why relevant professional experience is looked for by the committee. We look for at least, as a suggested minimum, 2 years full-time experience. We don't mind which sector you've gained this experience in. Yes, we welcome people from those classic sectors and industries like finance and consulting that you would expect to find at business school. But we also, in our really diverse class, we have people who are representing the forces and come from military careers, those from the creative and performing arts, those from the not-profit and third sector, those from medicine. So right across all sectors are welcomed and represented in class. But what they do have in common is experience to draw upon. So at least 2 years full-time work experience is what you need to aim for. So that's what we look for in terms of a strong candidate. But when it comes to submitting your application, we want to make sure that when you submit your application, it is complete. And it's only if it's complete that it will come across the desk of me and Tammy and other members of the admissions committee. So we want to make sure that you are in a good position to make sure your application is not left incomplete accidentally. So you do need to complete the online application form. You will need to make sure that you upload your one-page CV, as I've already mentioned, and there is also a section where you can delve into a little bit more detail about your most recent work experience and some of the highs and lows and role and responsibility that you currently hold. Another really important aspect of the application is your post-MBA career plan. So we take you through a series of questions, and it's almost like a reflective exercise, if you will, that really gets you to think about yourself 12 months or 24 months down the road. So you've applied to the MBA, you've been admitted, you're through the experience here at Oxford, and you are then seeking to re-enter the workforce as a graduate of the program, what are you going to be doing? Is it really achievable? Are you really the kind of person that that target employer is looking for? So in the career development section of the form, we're really asking you to reflect upon what it is you want to do in the future. Is it a realistic prospect? Convince us that it is realistic. Tell us about the research that you've done towards achieving that dream job or developing that business or whatever your personal aim might be, that will make us want to interview you and to believe that yes, you do have every chance of achieving that ambition, particularly once you have the Oxford MBA under your belt as well. As I already touched on the previous slide, English language test might be something that you need to provide. So we've mentioned here, test must be taken within the last 2 years prior to application, or alternatively a waiver letter. So this will be a waiver letter if you've studied in an English majority speaking country, or if you've studied at an institution where you've been taught entirely in English. Make sure you've got your transcripts. All you need to do is scan them and upload them. So we don't want degree certificates, we want your transcripts, in other words, your mark sheets. These are the reports that show us every module that you've studied throughout the duration of your degrees and the score that you achieved for each of those modules or subjects. So make sure that you have those in your hand ready to upload, or make sure you already have a PDF of them, perhaps that you've downloaded from your student self-service portal from your university, for example. You also need to upload your GMAT or GRE score. You'll find there are 2 places on your application that you need to do this. There's going to be one section where you type in your scores, and then once you've submitted your application, you then have to upload your score sheet. You also need to make sure that you have listed Side Business School, University of Oxford, as one of the institutions that you are applying to. So either on your Pearson or ETS account, make sure you've listed us as an institution you want to share your scores with, because log on and make sure that your scores are what you claim them to be. And actually, just on the note of GMAT and GRE, I'm conscious that on the previous slide, we didn't really talk about the kind of test scores that are competitive. And you might be worried that perhaps your test score isn't strong enough, or perhaps it's a little bit lopsided. And I think to answer that second point first, we're looking for a broadly balanced scorecard. So we are looking for strength across the piece rather than an amazingly strong showing in quant and then you can get away with a weak verbal score, for example. Doesn't really work like that. We need to be confident that you have a nice broad-based skill set to bring to the class. So a nice balanced scorecard. In terms of overall score for the GMAT, well, as Tammy's already said, class average, or median rather, is around 690. So you'll find that anything really of sort of 650 and above is going to be broadly competitive. Clearly, if you're targeting certain careers, thinking here particularly of careers within certain aspects of finance and certainly management consulting, a score that's above 700 is going to be looked for. And in terms of the GRE, we know that, of course, that particular test doesn't have an overall score, but something that's broadly around 160 in verbal and quant is going to be a fairly competitive score. You need to upload your essays. Now, I've already talked about the essays that support your application, but for those of you who are interested in scholarship funding, and you've already been, I'm sure, researching all of the information on our website about scholarships, you will see that a couple of the scholarships do require you to write additional essays. So be careful, double check that. There are also links from the online application system that will take you to those places where you can learn more, write your essays, but make sure you upload them, because you don't want to submit a great application, be admitted to the program and not get considered for the scholarship that you really wanted to enter the competition for. As I've already mentioned, you need to register 2 referees, but your references also need to be submitted by the application deadline. So make sure you've registered your referees on your application, you're in touch with your referees, make sure they know when the deadline is, and make sure that they are ready to submit their letters of recommendation online by the 11th of January, if that's the stage deadline that you're heading for. And just as a side note, you don't need to sit there and wait until your referees have submitted in order to hit submit on your application. You can submit anytime, but your references do need to come through to us by the 11th as well. Last but not least, you do need to pay a non-refundable application fee. It's £150. It's really easy to pay. There's a link from the online application system. It just takes you to our online store. Works just like Amazon, very straightforward. It's worth mentioning that those of you who are resident in a low income economy, now this is as defined by the World Bank, and again there's a link from our site that will take you to a list of these 38 countries. If you are a permanent resident in one of those countries, we will waive the application fee for you, but only if you are resident in those low-income economies. Everybody else is required to pay that application fee, and it is non-refundable. And I will now hand you back to Tammy.
Great, thank you so much, Charlotte. So you've covered quite in detail what we look for in terms of the actual application, very much what is on paper, the clear requirements. But very often I'm asked by candidates on the road, what makes a strong application? How do we sift through the thousands of applications to really be able to identify those candidates that we feel will bring a great contribution to the classroom, will go on and do amazing things, and who we essentially want to be part of their story for the rest of their lives? And there's a number of other ways that you can really strengthen your application beyond just your GMAT scores and your academics and where you've worked essentially and what you plan to do post-MBA. Some of the key criteria that we are looking for are things around different kind of EQs. So, your leadership ability is a key component of a characteristic that we would look for in a lot of our candidates. So leadership does not necessarily relate to management. We're not saying you have to be at a manager level, although that is way to demonstrate leadership. It can be in anything that is extracurricular, or perhaps you've worked on a project within your organization that you've led. So you can identify different ways to showcase that. It could even be within a sporting team. Perhaps if you've been in a captain position within a kind of sports group, that is another way to demonstrate leadership. Some of these qualities will come through in your application itself, and they will continue to be assessed though through the application process. So at your interview is another way that we would assess these. So another way to look at it is, another thing to look at is your communication skills. So this can be identified in your application itself through, say, for example, your essays, how you have detailed your career plans, but it's also very evident again in your interview. We're looking for people that have an understanding of how long to perhaps speak for, but on a very basic level. Perhaps it's a bit of your command of English and how you communicate with others, as that's vital within the MBA program to be able to effectively communicate within a group. But it's also about the things that you choose to share, how you deliver an argument, for example, or put forth an idea that you feel passionate about. This communication style in your essay could come through in terms of when talking about a statistic that you're passionate about. Teamwork is another very, very strong thing that we look for. Again, within the MBA program, you are often working within groups and different teams. So being collaborative is extremely important. That can either be identified, for example, through your references. So if your referee is able to talk about an example, perhaps when you've worked either within a team or led a project or something like that, can show your ability to work with colleagues or work to deliver something important. Career vision is slightly different from just your career plan. And as Charlotte even mentioned, we want people that have the ability to understand where their skills lie and how best the MBA is going to help them to be able to advance their career plans. So being aware of what requirements are certain employers perhaps are looking for, whether it is the GMAT or whether it is things like international exposure, but really being able to articulate that in a way that is achievable, and that is something that you feel passionate about, and that in 5 or 10 years' time, as an alum, we would be basically proud to be able to look back at your story and know that you've contributed towards the vision of the school. And all of these sort of tie into the awareness piece. And I think awareness is very critical for candidates, where they understand their strengths, their weaknesses, again, how they can contribute, where they feel they're going to be in the next few years post MBA, and really being able to understand within a classroom environment, how to respect others, how to contribute effectively without perhaps overpowering the views and opinions of others, but also knowing when to share their own personal thoughts and ideas and contribute towards that classroom discussion. We really look at applications holistically, and I'm sure a lot of schools say that, but it is something that really holds true to Oxford. I think it's not something that you should reflect on if perhaps your GMAT, for example, is slightly lower than the class average, or if your academics perhaps are not where you feel they should be, or again, aligned to what we generally look for in the application. We're looking for candidates that both on paper can, showcase their abilities, but also to really be able to be an asset to the classroom. I always say to candidates when talking to them, the number one thing that I try and assess, if I was sitting in the classroom, would I want you sitting next to me? Would what you bring to the classroom be something that would help me as an individual? And that is really what we want the class makeup to be about, is how students and peers are able to support each other, whether it's, looking at a career kind of plan, whether it's a joint initiative together, or being able to connect you with somebody that can help advance your career, or whether sitting in the classroom and you're working on a case study and you are perhaps either from that country or from that sector, or even from that company itself, and how you would be able to bring direct insights into that discussion. So I would say, beyond just what you put in your application, make sure you have a very clear story. Everything should make sense. You shouldn't, be talking about one specific topic within your kind of work experience and a difference in your career plan, and then all of a sudden be talking about a statistic in your essay that is not connected to anything that you've outlined in terms of what your post-MBA plans are. Everything should really showcase who you are, what you would bring to the classroom, what are you passionate about, so that we can get a very good idea on what your strongest attributes are. And then within the interview, it should really bring all of those elements together within your application, so that we're able to really understand the kind of strengths, weaknesses, and how the MBA, and more specifically how Oxford, will be a great asset to you to be able to move forward post MBA. So I think that sort of outlines what we're looking for in an application, what the general requirements are, how to submit a complete application. We have, as we mentioned, a stage coming up on the 11th of January, but we do have 4 stages available, and generally these dates stay roughly the same each year. So perhaps if you are looking for next year, continue to monitor the website when we publish new stages. But otherwise, stage 3, 11th of January, and then we have another stage 4, which is our final stage, on the 5th of April. We do accept applications in every stage. However, we don't have a quota or set number of applications we make in each stage. So the later you apply, generally, the more restricted you are in terms of places that are available. But if you have any specific questions on any of the finer details of the stages, interview dates, all of those are provided on our website, and you can actually see when you'll get the next decisions on interviews and final decisions. So we're going to jump to the questions. We've had a number of questions that have come through. So if you just bear with us 1 second.
Right, okay, good question here, and I'm sure a lot of you are going to be in this position. Someone's asking whether they can submit their application with an unofficial GMAT score. So they're actually taking the test on January the 9th, so right before the deadline. Well, you're lucky that you're taking the GMAT and not the GRE, and that's because you will get your provisional score on the day of the test. So once you've taken your GMAT, you will receive a copy of what's called a test taker's copy of the score report, and that's what you need to upload to your MBA application. So yes, your test taker's copy or your unofficial score report, that's all you need to upload as part of your MBA application. You must remember to register us as an institution you want to share your official scores with, as it were, because part of our due diligence once we are assessing your application will be to hop onto the website of either Pearson VUE for the GMAT or ETS for the GRE, and we will log in and we will ask the system to show us your full score sheet, and they will only expose that to us if you've registered us as one of your institutions. I think you get to name 5 as part of the test fee, so just make sure we are one of them, please.
Yeah. So jumping on to another question around the CV and resume, as Charlotte mentioned, we do have a template that is available on our website. Somebody's asking if it's strongly recommended essentially to use that template. As long as it is a one-page template, that is our main sort of core criteria of it. I would advise that you do look at the template on the website, though, just more at the bullet points in terms of the kind of things that we're actually assessing in the resume. Just remember that your CV or resume is not for a job application. It is more so for our admissions purposes. So some of the things can get removed, but I would say have a look at it at the very least and make sure that your own template at least covers what we're looking for on ours. But other than that, you don't actually have to use our template.
Right, okay, so some of you might be in the same situation as this candidate. Basically, they've sat for their GMAT, they don't think that the score really reflects their true ability, so they're going to have a second go. And that's quite classic with the GMAT. I think second test attempt, you often see some nice uplift. So if you're not satisfied with your first attempt, always retake. If you're convinced you can do better, it's got to be worth it. And as I've mentioned, the application deadline, it's the 11th. So providing you retake the test before the 11th, and indeed potentially if you want to live dangerously on the 11th, then because you get your unofficial new set of scores and you'll get that score sheet on the day, you can upload that to your application, which is great. And then we will eventually be able to see your full set of scores once that becomes available. If you are in the position, however, of needing to retake a GRE, remember, you don't get your unofficial score sheet until about 2 weeks or so after you've sat the test. So you really can't push the GRE the way that you can push the GMAT.
Perfect. So somebody is asking around, preparing for the application, it being a little bit close to the deadlines and not sure if they should apply in stage 4 for this application cycle or wait until stage 1 for next year. So already mentioned, we don't have a set allocation of places for every stage. So we reserve the right to actually waitlist candidates within the application process should we have met our sort of available offers that we're allowed to make. So I would say my best piece of advice is to always submit an application when you're able to submit the strongest possible application. That's always number one. So whether that is in the first or the last stage, what matters the most is the strength of your application so that you've had enough time to work on essays and references and GMAT, for example. However, if you are really wanting to ensure that you do have space, if you would like to wait for stage 1, that is also more of a personal preference. We have removed a stage from last year, and So the April deadline now is our final deadline. So we're unsure to really be able to say if we'd be full by stage 4 or not. Unfortunately, it's perhaps a risk that you'll either have to take or wait until stage 1 for next year.
Question here about transcripts. Just a good point. Particularly American universities, rather than give you access to your official transcripts, as an alum, as a graduate of a program, you can usually log in and get an unofficial transcript that you can download for your records. That is fine. When it comes to applying, that's all we need at this stage is your unofficial transcripts. It could even be a screen print from a system that you can log into where you've got your academic record there. The only time that we're going to ask you for your official transcripts, so hard copy or certified, is if you make it through to the interview stage. So we'll ask you for that much later along in the process. But for application, all you need to do is upload scans of your unofficial transcripts.
Okay, so jumping back to the GMAT, somebody is asking if you have a GMAT score of below 650, would we automatically decline somebody just based on their GMAT score? So the short answer is no. We would never just automatically reject somebody based on a GMAT score. The averages and the competitive GMAT scores that we're providing is just that. It's both an average as well as what we deem as competitive. However, looking at your entire application, we will always weigh up different elements. So if perhaps you have an extremely strong undergraduate degree where you've got a first-class degree or an upper 2.1, it does give you slight flexibility on the GMAT. It's a little bit of a difficult question to answer in its entirety if we can't see your entire application. So I would say don't let the GMAT be the barrier for you to not apply, but I would say make sure that the rest of your application is strong. We do have quite a range of GMAT scores. We have candidates below 650 on the MBA program, but like I said, either their academics are strong or they have strong work experience, and they are also not trying to perhaps work in a sector where the GMAT score is a factor post MBA. So if you did say you wanted to work in management consulting, for example, and you had a very low GMAT score, that definitely would raise a red flag with us. But we would never just reject a candidate based on a GMAT score.
Yeah, I think that's really, really good advice. Someone here asking about the section of the form where you're asked to explain your current role in a little bit more detail and perhaps tell us about some of your successes and some of your challenges. And this particular person, they're only 1 month into a new job, so very little to draw upon at the moment. What I would say is draw upon your previous role. Pull some examples out from a previous role to answer that particular question. Clearly, we're going to get to see from your CV that you're only 1 month into your current post. So don't worry about that. Make sure your CV is up to date. Make sure all of your roles are there. Make sure the dates are really clear so we can see that you only started your new role, perhaps, at the beginning of the year or whatever it might be. But really, the other section where we're asking you to showcase some of those particular challenges or some of those successes, I think just be sensible. Tell us the stories, tell us the true stories, and it might be not literally from the job that you hold right now. It might be from the post that you held, last month. That's absolutely fine.
So somebody's just asking for the stage 3 deadline, is there a specific time that you have to submit your application by? And the answer is yes, so midnight GMT on January the 11th. So just be mindful if you're in a different time zone to make sure that the deadline is for midnight GMT.
There's a question here about the work experience requirement. So we are really keen on at least 2 years of full-time work experience, and yes, that would exclude things like internships. So whilst internships they're really useful, and we certainly want to see those explored on your CV so that we can build up a really full picture of every professional experience that you've had, whether it's paid or unpaid or on an internship basis or full-time basis. In terms of those years of experience you bring to the class, that really is your full-time paid employment that we're really looking for there.
Mm-hmm. We have a couple of questions around the average ages and ages of candidates coming through, and I had said class average age, was 28 years. So people are asking if they're 29, is that a disadvantage? And we really just want to reiterate that these are averages. This is not that the vast majority actually are even 28 or 27. It's more that the range is such that we have candidates as young as 23, and I think the oldest candidate is 40 this year, or 41. So we do generally, though, look for candidates that are applying for an MBA at the right time that is for them. So as long as you have a strong narrative as to why this is the right time for you to do an MBA, that is what we care about more, as opposed to your age or even how many years work experience you have. And we would obviously like the class to be made up of candidates that have similar goals, or in a period of their lives where they are all after sort of the same kind of objectives. So if we had somebody perhaps that was very senior, that came with a wealth of experience, you may find some of the classes a little bit, not advantageous for you. So therefore, we do try and ensure that the class makeup is made up of candidates that are at the right time of their lives to be doing an MBA. But yes, 29 years old, 30, that really is not the thing that we'd be looking for in terms of how old you are and why you want to do an MBA.
There's a question here around the 1+1. So some of you might be thinking, well, that's all well and good talking about the MBA, but I actually want to apply to the 1+1 MBA. And for those of you who don't know what that is, that's really a 2-year Oxford experience where you undertake a taught Master of Science in your first year to have more of a specialist, more focused academic deep dive, if you will, and you'd achieve that by applying directly to that particular master's program. And then in your second year at Oxford, you would do the Oxford MBA. So for those folk, you really need to make 2 applications around the same time. So you'd need to apply to the taught MSc program that's caught your eye. There are quite a large number of partner programs available these days, probably around 30. You'll see which ones they are on our website. But that's one application you need to take care of, which will have its own set of deadlines and entry requirements and materials requirements and so on. But the other application that you make, it is basically the MBA application. So you apply in the normal way, as I've just described. You hit the deadlines as we've just talked about and supply all of the materials that we've just touched upon. So for those of you who are 1+1 candidates, you're really submitting 2 applications, one of which is an MBA application.
So somebody's asking for part of the application around your kind of post-MBA career plan. There's a question on what do I plan to do between now and the MBA to help strengthen those plans. So what we're essentially looking for is, again, it goes back to how to strengthen your application, is that element of awareness and preparation. So is there anything that you perhaps need to work on to strengthen your chances or your feasibility or profile of looking for a specific role post MBA? Is there anything perhaps that you feel is a weakness, whether it's your quantability or perhaps you haven't done maths for many years and you want to freshen up on that? But also really to identify your specific sector or company that you're trying to target, really making sure you've done your research on what are they looking for, and do you fit that profile? And if not, what can you do to help strengthen your profile before that time starts? Because it's a 1-year program, it's extremely intense. And there's very little time to sort of change and redefine and think about what you would like to do a few times. So we always try and say, prepare as much as you can before the MBA starts, so that when you arrive, you can hit the ground running from a career point of view and really maximize your time in Oxford to be able to immerse yourself within this experience. So that question is just really about what can you do to help strengthen your employment opportunities post-MBA.
A couple of questions here about supporting materials and qualifications. Those of you who believe that you qualify for a waiver from the English test, you either need to upload your degree transcript if it states the language of instruction is English, or upload your transcript if it's from a university that's in a majority speaking English country. So, you know, if you did your degree in the UK or the US or Australia, obviously it was taught in English, so just upload that, or get a letter from your institution. So if you're checking out your transcript, let's say it's from an Indian university, it was taught in English, but your transcript doesn't say the language of instruction, then get a letter from your university to that effect and upload it. You will need to upload that as part of your application. And another quick question about qualifications is whether you need to go to the trouble of converting your degree score into the UK grading system. No, you don't. That's our. So on the application form, upload your transcripts, tell us what score you got if you wish to. That might be expressed as might be a letter system, or it might be out of 100, or it might be a Greek letter. It could be whatever score your particular university uses. We are really familiar with pretty much every educational system in the world, so we will convert your test score into the UK equivalent for you.
Somebody's asking if we could just touch on again whether you would have a lower chance of being accepted in the later stage than if you applied in stage 3. And just to go back to that, your chances of an offer remain the same in every stage because your profile remains the same, but you have a higher risk of being waitlisted. That's sort of the greatest risk. So we will always make an offer to a candidate, whether you applied in stage 1 or stage 4, your chances of being made that offer remain the same because it's you as an individual, your profile that we base it on. However, if the class is full, the chances of you being waitlisted, meaning you don't get an offer unless there's a space that is freed up, that increases the further along you apply in the application stages. So that is the risk, but you actually receiving a offer remains the same in any stage.
Someone listening is really wanting to attend the programme in the academic year 2020 to 2021. So he's wondering whether to apply now and potentially defer his place if he gets an offer. Good question. We do occasionally grant deferrals, but never in the scenario that you've described, I'm afraid. The idea is that you apply to enter the programme when the time is ready for you. So if you are looking to start the programme in September 2020, the earliest that you can apply will be stage 1 of next year's application cycle. So the only deferrals that we ever grant on that occasional basis is where someone has made their application, they're ready to come this September, everything's fine, everything's in place, and then let's say hypothetically they are taken very ill, or perhaps a dependent family member is unwell, or perhaps they are, I don't know, just struck down with one of those life events that means all their plans suddenly go up in the air. Now we will try and be supportive and favourable in that kind of scenario and say, well, yes, of course, we'll defer your spot to next year. But the idea is that deferral is granted when something unforeseen happens to you. So you can't really apply with a view to asking for a deferral straight away.
So we've got 2 questions on recommenders. So if you have, somebody's asking, is it okay to have more than 2 letters of recommendation? So the short answer is yes. However, if you perhaps gave us 5 or 6 letters of recommendations, we may only read 2. So if you would like to have more than 2 and perhaps 3, the system doesn't prevent you from doing that, but we would not necessarily read every single letter of recommendation that comes through. Our main core requirements is to read 2 and to have 2 letters of recommendation. So anything above that may or may not be read, essentially. But some candidates do put in 3 referees. And the follow-on question was, is there sort of an idea of how long they have to submit once they get the request sent through to them? It doesn't. So you basically should have to remind your recommenders to complete the form, but there is an option on the application system to resubmit it, to sort of remind them that they need to complete the letter of recommendation.
Yeah, that's good good advice. Actually, one thing to mention on references, it could be that you might be thinking, well, I've got my two formal referees, if you like. So I've got two good professional referees, but I'm also really in close contact with an alum from the program, and I would really like her or him to support my application in some way. So rather than waste a referee registration, if you like, on the alum, what we would suggest you do is register your two referees, but reach out to the alum and ask them to get in contact with us directly. They'll know how to speak to the school. They can send us a letter of support, and we'll gladly pop that on your file for committee. A question here about the GMAT. So someone is retaking quite close to the deadline. Now, when you get your unofficial scores, you get your scores for verbal and for quant, but you won't have your analytical writing score. That's fine. So just upload your score sheet that has a blank in that section, or potentially you could give us your previous AWA score just so we can see what you've achieved in the past. But that's fine. It's really verbal and quant. And make sure you upload your score sheet, even if it's the unofficial one that is missing the AWA score.
Somebody's asking if there's a pre-course if the English test results is lower than the minimum requirement. I mean, you're free to take any other course, but in terms of for our admissions requirements, the English test scores are pretty firm and fixed. Of course, if you don't meet those requirements and you would still like to submit an application, that is your choice. But you would have to meet the requirements that we're looking for on the TOEFL or IELTS. So if you look at on the website, there's a very detailed section explaining what the different scores are required. Obviously, if you would like to take any other pre-course to help improve your English, that's fine, but it wouldn't be counted towards the application system itself.
Yeah, I think that's worth reiterating. And actually, some of you might be thinking, well, if let's say my GMAT score is a little bit weak, or maybe I've just missed out on the language test, is Oxford likely to make me a conditional offer? Well, the short answer is no. We really need you to hit those standards and put together that really strong application when you're applying. So we won't, for example, entertain an application that doesn't have a GMAT score, or the language score is coming later or anything like this. So we're not going to make conditional offers. Very occasionally, we'll make an offer to a candidate and make it conditional upon them retaking a GMAT, let's say, but that will be at our instigation rather than yours. But generally speaking, you need to be hitting the kind of scores we're looking for when you apply, certainly with regards to that English language test.
Again, a number of questions around references and letters of recommendation. Somebody's asking how long the letter should be, and I would say as long as needed and as descriptive as possible. It is not a letter stating how long you worked for them and your JD, essentially, so your roles and responsibilities. It's more around speaking on those different kind of EQs, so your teamwork, leadership, communication abilities, contribution and value to an organization, perhaps even talking about how they feel the MBA would support your post-MBA plans, how you would contribute to the classroom. So somebody that is invested in you. If somebody writes a paragraph on you, it's obviously their choice, but it does for us, it's almost a missed opportunity to give us a bit more information to showcase and put your application in a strong position. So we have no set length, perhaps at least a page long is a pretty good way of explaining it, but it should rather be descriptive and showcase who you are as an individual. And somebody had asked if it was a set of questions or just an open letter. There's a few very quick sort of questions to answer around your English capability and your leadership, and if you're exceeding or competent in these areas, but the main part of it is just an opportunity to upload a letter of recommendation.
I think it's a really good idea to register your referees quite early on in the application process, because then your referees can be putting together those answers and putting together their letter while you're working on the rest of your application. So don't leave it until the last minute to register your referees, because that's not really respectful of their time. And then they might bash out a quick letter that doesn't really give us very deep insight into your real capabilities. But as soon as you register them, they get an email telling them what to do. It's very straightforward. It is just a bunch of competencies that we ask them to really rate you against in terms of strength and weakness, and then in the letter really explore those competencies in a little more detail, perhaps explaining why they have rated you as particularly outstanding in one regard but maybe in need of some development around another. It just builds up that full picture. Question here, whether 2 recommenders from the same employer is likely to hinder your application. No, not particularly at all. I think as long as it's the quality of the references, really. As I said, we're not interested in someone's status. When we don't mind if they both work at the same company. It could be that you've always worked at the same employer, but you've really shown great progression. That's absolutely fine. So that's not going to hold back your application in any way. Just make sure you're asking people to act for you who really know you.
Absolutely. Somebody's asking, as a reapplicant, if there's any disadvantages, or is it harder to be considered for the MBA if you've already applied before and perhaps were not successful? We have a number of candidates that reapply either from the previous year or from years, from 2 or 3 years before the current application cycle. And they often do get offers onto the program. The biggest thing that we do look for, though, is a significant improvement. What has changed between then and now that has, really changed your profile, whether that is perhaps you did improve the GMAT, or perhaps you got promoted or worked on a significant project, or if you were looking at doing your own startup, perhaps you've actually got that off the ground and it has started to the point where you've got some kind of experience that you could be able to bring. So the key thing for us is what has changed, and there's actually an essay on that if you are a reapplicant, to outline what significant changes have happened between the time you last applied. But yeah, we do have candidates that do get into the program that have applied before and were not successful.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a question here about the interview shortlisting decision date. So for those of you that have looked on our website, you'll see that the 1st of February is when we will be drawing up the shortlist, and that's the date upon which you can expect to hear from us. So assuming you submit your application on time and it's complete for next Friday's deadline, let's say, then we will be in touch with you by email on Friday, the 1st of Feb, to let you know whether you've been shortlisted for interview. And if you have, in that email, we will set out for you all of the options available. So you might prefer to take your interview here in Oxford, for example. We might be offering face-to-face interview opportunities in a city near you. We do try and spread ourselves around the world as we can, depending on who's traveling where and when. And of course, there's always the opportunity to interview via Skype, though we would encourage you to think about coming and spending the day with us here in Oxford if you can, because not only do you get more insight into the program, but of course you get to meet some students, which is great. So look out for the 1st of Feb when you'll find out if we want to meet you at interview.
Perfect. So we're almost out of time. I think we can take 2 very quick questions. Somebody's asking about, could we update the GMAT score after the application submission? And we've spoken quite at length at this, but I think there is one thing to point out, that if you have applied with a GMAT score that you did want to try and improve, you are free at any point between the time that you submit and the time that you get an offer to update a GMAT score. However, we can't guarantee that it would be considered within the timings and the deadlines that we look for. So if you happen to do your GMAT after the committee has met already and made a decision, we can't retrospectively go back on that. So it is something that you could do if you would like to, but just bear in mind that it may not be able to have a direct impact on your application if the timing doesn't line up with when the committee is meeting, for example.
And someone here has asked, Okay, so they might register more than 2 referees, but only 2 submit by the deadline. Well, that's great, because that's all we want. So that's fine. Nice, easy one to finish on.
Perfect. Great. Okay, so thank you so much. We've just gone over 3 o'clock our time. So sorry if we did not get to your question. We had a very long list. If you have any specific questions that you would like to ask us, please go on to the website, though. We've got an FAQs page that details a lot of the questions that you are all asking us. We have a number of different web forms where you can download a brochure or register your interest. And we'll hopefully be able to cover any of those items in there. If not, there is an email address on our website that you can send us any other questions that you may have. But we wish you all the best in your application, and we hope to see a few of you at least at interview or in Oxford.
Thanks very much for listening to us, and good afternoon from Oxford.
Yes, thank you. Bye.